I'm Infamous Fear, and this is life advice from someone who wears frilly shirts and is barely able to do their own hair. Let's start today off with a question. What was your first queer movie? We were all baby queers once, tottering around in our figuratively shaky legs, hit with the sudden realisation of our own queer status with as much shock, wonder and potential fear as a newborn animal seeing the sun for the first time. This moment of figurative birth is one that we all share. Pretty much every queer person in the universe will have the realisation that they're not quite like everyone else and don't exactly fit into the narrative that was planned out for them. The question is, what to do next? As a battle-scarred veteran of the coming out process, I'm here to offer you a little guidance. Every baby queer needs a buddy, some advice, someone who understands how they feel and who may have gone through a similar experience themselves. Now, I'm an internet person, which means that I'm not entirely real, so I can't pretend to be able to help each and every one of you in the way that I wish I could. I don't know exactly what you're going through, what circumstances you find yourself in, and what challenges you might have to face. But there is one thing I can do. I can tell you what to watch. There's a vast landscape of queer media out there. Some of it's easily accessible. Some of it you'll never find without a lot of digging and a whole lot of luck. Some of it's great, some of it's terrible. It's a daunting prospect. What's a good first queer movie? What would you show to the newly fledged queer person in your life without wasting their time with something boring or depressing the hell out of them? What was your first queer movie and was it a good choice for first? Well, whether you're a young queer person or an older mentor, or whether you just want to watch a fun, happy queer movie that won't bore the piss out of you, I'm here to make the process as easy as possible. First, some guidelines for picking a good first queer movie. Nothing terrible should happen. Avoid anything that could potentially be called triggering. There are several fantastic queer movies that are very dark and confronting, and probably shouldn't be seen by a young queer person or someone who is still hesitant about their identity. So no Holocaust movies, no movies featuring hate crimes or abuse, and no movies where everyone is a deeply amoral psychopath. Definitely don't start someone off with mysterious skin. Choose something relatable. Remember, this is the first queer movie this person has ever seen. They might not be sure how they fit into the queer community. They might even be intimidated by notions of how they're expected to act or ideas about what experiences they're supposed to have. For a younger queer person, coming-of-age movies are always a good pick. The character's around their age and is having experiences that they can relate to. Actually, coming-of-age movies are always a good pick, because pretty much everyone who's had the experience of being an awkward queer teenager, and pretty much every queer person has, no matter how old they are now, can relate. That said, if the person is a lot older, feel free to offer them something a little more age-appropriate, because a depiction of sassy queer teenagers might irritate them, and maybe they're ready for something a little more challenging. Aim for something happy and light-hearted, but not crap. Happy and cheery is not synonymous with garbage. Don't pick up the literal first piece of queer media you see, because it might be so terrible and boring that the poor baby queer in your life will then compulsively avoid all kinds of queer media for years afterwards, instead trying to fill the hole with rom-coms and musicals. If the movie is just an excuse to parade bland beefcakes or bland conventionally attractive women in front of the camera with practically no storyline and no budget, try and pick something else more interesting. If you wouldn't watch it yourself, don't subject anyone else to it. Great! In addition to my own opinions, I also conducted an informal study online, asking friends of the show to nominate the first queer movie they saw and whether they thought it was a good choice for first. So now that we've gone through some good general advice, and I've asked people to share their experiences, it's time to go through my top 20 best first queer movies. Listed in alphabetical order. A Nightmare on Elm Street 2. Freddy's Revenge. On the surface a generic 80s slasher, Nightmare 2 is one of the most screamingly queer mainstream movies ever, and it makes its queer character the hero. I hate slashers and I loved every minute of this. Is it a positive depiction of homosexuality? I'm not sure. Is it gay as hell? Hell yes. A definite pick for any LGBT person who's a fan of horror. Appropriate behaviour. Shireen, an Iranian bisexual woman, tries to figure out what she wants to do with her life after breaking up with her girlfriend.
Funny, ridiculous at times, and a very entertaining and authentic depiction of queer female sexuality.
Did you see that guy with the wax Dali mustache?
I hate so many things too.
Maybe not for the really young queers in your life, but a definite recommend for anyone over the age of about 16. Beautiful Thing. Possibly one of the most adorable movies in existence, Beautiful Thing has amazing primary coloured 90s decor, an excellent mum who watches musicals with her son, helpful queer people who cheekily welcome the two young protagonists into their fold, and a girl who constantly sings Mama Cass. It definitely has conflict and drama, but it resolves itself in a way that makes you happy. Plus, it's one of the few movies based on a play that I actually like. This one is probably one of my top picks. Bound. Two queer women con a mafioso and steal his money, end up together and survive the film. Bound is very stylised and unashamedly sexual. Probably not for younger viewers as it's basically a porn, but it's so much fun that I have to recommend it. But I'm a cheerleader. Megan gets sent to an ex-gay camp, insisting all the time that she isn't gay. Much like Andy Dufresne had to go to prison to be a criminal, Megan's time in the restrictive and heteronormative environment of True Directions instead helps her realise her queer identity. And yes, I realise that was a horrible metaphor, but this movie is fun as hell, campy and accessible, as well as exploring the reality for a lot of queer people, particularly queer women, who don't realise that how they feel is in any way different from how straight people feel.
Everyone reads Cosmo. Everyone looks at other girls all the time.
But you only assume that they're thinking what you're thinking when they look. But they're not.
Surely all women check out other women, right?
I thought everybody had those thoughts.
As someone with a very early realisation, I didn't even know how it was possible to not know you were queer when you hit puberty, and I thought a lot of people foolish for not figuring it out until they were older. This movie helped me see how being a late-blooming queer is not only possible, but very common. Fucking Amal. One of the few queer movies that acknowledges that one can be well aware of one's sexuality, but not feel able to do anything about it. Agnes knows she has a crush on Ellen, and she knows what that crush means, but she struggles with the fact that she's awkward and unpopular, and cannot in any way conceive of the thought that Ellen could possibly like her back. As someone who was an awkward, unpopular queer teen who was convinced of her own hideousness, this is definitely one of the most relatable depictions of queer adolescence, and has the benefit of the happy resolution that many queer people don't get until they're a lot older. I have no idea how Lucas Moodysson manages to write teenage girl characters so well, but I'm not questioning it. The incredibly true adventure of two girls in love. Zany, exuberant, and very, very 90s. This film starts out with one of the characters already well aware of her sexuality. It also has a queer person of colour, queer family members, and one of the leads is even butch. Also, she roller skates everywhere. What delights doesn't this movie have? Jeffrey. Jeffrey is so terrified of contracting HIV that he swears off sex and dating, until he meets Steve, a lovely man who just so happens to be HIV positive. This one might not be so relatable, as it deals mostly with the AIDS crisis and the particular climate of the queer community in the 90s, but I can't pass up gay swishy Patrick Stewart and the universe of people who are so keen for Jeffrey to be happy. Also, it's based on a play, and somehow it's still actually good. Oh my god! Ma Vie en Rose. A young trans child insists on her identity, while her frustrated and confused family try to come to terms with it. This movie does have a lot of difficult moments, and there might be more light-hearted depictions of trans children nowadays, but it's still positive overall and will ring true to any gender-diverse child. Orlando. Okay, fine, it doesn't fit my criteria about being relatable. I mean, who among us is androgynous and immortal? But Sally Potter's adaptation of Virginia Woolf's classic is not only an interesting examination of gender roles, it's also one of the most beautiful movies I've ever seen.
Same person. No difference at all. Just a different sex.
Pariah. Alike is a young black lesbian dealing with her parents' unrealistic expectations of her, homophobia, and young love. This one's a little less fun than some of the others, but it's an absolutely fantastic movie about coming of age in a difficult situation, and it's so worth seeing. The perks of being a wallflower. Perfect for any misfit kid who's just discovered Bowie and the Smiths and who longs to find the people with whom they belong. The main character isn't queer in this, but there's a pretty prominent queer supporting character. Not my top pick, but as a book and as a movie, it definitely spoke to a lot of people. Pride. It's the 1980s. A young gay chap, Joe, joins his first gay pride march and gets involved in activism, joining a group of queer people trying their utmost to support the downtrodden of a different kind. Pride emphasises the connection between people who are suffering under unfair judgments and rules, and shows how communities need to work together, as well as showing Joe's move towards acceptance and finding a group of people who love and accept him for who he is. There's also an examination of the very real challenges that faced Britain at the time. But holy shit, will this fill you with feelings of all kinds. I teared up several times. Priscilla, Queen of the Desert. The tale of 3 drag queens going on a road trip. Priscilla is fun, fabulous, witty, and just the right amount of bitchy. It also hints at a few of the darker and scarier aspects of queer life without being overwhelming. Tu Wong Fu is also a similar movie, but definitely more tame. Personally, I think it's a poor substitute for Priscilla, but a good deal of people saw it as their first queer movie, and it meant something to them. It might be worth considering, especially for younger viewers. Rocky Horror Picture Show. Of all of the movies listed for the first queer movie experiences, the number 1 movie mentioned was the Rocky Horror Picture Show. Rocky Horror is an extremely outlandish musical about a boring couple, Brad and Janet, getting a flat tire and seeking refuge from a storm. Unfortunately, in true horror movie fashion, the door they knock on belongs to the insane Dr. Frankenfurter, a sweet transvestite transsexual from Transylvania, and his house of madcap queer hangers-on. From there, Brad and Janet are seduced into queer sexuality, ending the movie dancing around in identical stripper outfits. This is an absolutely notorious movie for 2 reasons. The first is that it's probably one of the queerest movies that ever existed. It's entirely about rejecting the norm and becoming open to new, ridiculous experiences. Even reasonable hesitance is very rapidly overcome by the seductive powers of Dr. Frankenfurter. This is Letting Your Freak Flag Fly, the movie. The other is that Rocky Horror Picture Show is probably the hugest cult movie that's ever existed, with its own often very insular culture. Now, whether or not you want to be part of a very exclusive community with its own cliques and in-jokes, a big part of being queer is trying to find a place where you belong. Tried and true, one of the granddaddies of queer cinema, Rocky Horror is a fun movie, and it doesn't take itself seriously at all. The Sum of Us. Not only is this one of the best roles Russell Crowe has ever played, it's a wonderful examination of the relationship between a father and a son. Not to mention it's downright funny to see how irritating it can be to have a parent who's too accepting of your sexuality. Plus, it's based on a play, and yet I don't hate it. That's a serious vote of confidence from me. Velvet Goldmine. Todd Haynes' glamtastic queer romp through the outrageous glitz of the 70s was responsible for a lot of young people having confusing and exciting feelings they didn't quite understand until later, and has one of the best and most accurate representations of what it's like to be an awkward queer teenager.
I should think that if people were to get the wrong impression of me, the one to which you so eloquently referred, it wouldn't be the wrong impression in the slightest.
That is me! That's me! That's me!
A definite recommend, although judging on the responses I got, it's probably better if you watch it alone. So just give the baby queer in your life the DVD and then leave the house for a few hours. They'll figure it out. Victor Victoria, another musical featuring Julie Andrews doing some fabulous recursive drag and some very prominent and non-stereotypical gay characters. This was the first queer movie for a lot of people and is undoubtedly a great pick, especially for lovers of musicals. The Way He Looks. A blind teenager deals with insensitive bullying, complicated feelings between him and his best friend, and his growing interest in a new student at his school. Once again, an absolutely adorable movie, and one that explores a different side of queer identity, that of queer disabled people.
Whether you like these movies or have your own favourites, I want to offer my love and support to everyone who's figuring themselves out. Good luck, and may you have a happy and joyous time watching the best of queer cinema.